Hey everyone, this is Steve Pixler again, and I want to talk to you about a new series that I want to kick off today called Journey. It's going to be our Journey series, and it's about navigating safely out of religious tradition. Now, my story, as I've shared in my introduction, is all tangled up in the business of journeying out of religious tradition. And as I share more of my story, that'll make more sense as we go along. But I know there are a lot of people that are working their way out of fundamentalist religious traditions of all types, legalistic, rules-oriented, very strict, controlling environments that are very difficult to extricate yourself from. So I want to talk about our story to help folks navigate their way through some of that. And let me talk a little bit about, first of all, why I want to share our story and why I want to talk about this, and then sort of how I'm going to do it, what I'm going to talk about, what I'm not going to talk about, and then I'll wrap it up with just a little bit more of our actual story. The first thing I want to tell you is why I want to talk about the journey. Why does that matter? When you've come through what we've come through, the temptation is just to simply put all of that behind you and say, wow, that was a slow walk through hell, and I hope to never have to even think about that again. The temptation is to just move on and put it behind you. In fact, when we were making our way out of our religious tradition, which was Oneness Pentecostalism, as I'll say more about, but as we were making our way out of it, we would gravitate toward people who had been through the same experience, walked the same journey, and we found again and again that they didn't really want to talk about it. There was almost a resistance to even being welcoming or even being friendly toward people like us. And as I've walked more through this journey, I've come to understand why. Once you've moved past it, you really want to get past it. You don't want to get stuck reliving the trauma of walking your way out of a tradition like this. And so the temptation is just to move on and say, let's not even worry about that anymore. But I feel drawn for a couple of reasons. In fact, I feel a bit of a divine mandate for a couple of reasons to talk about the journey out of religious tradition. The first thing is, I believe that our story has power to help other people navigate safely. When I think about what we've walked through, Gina, my wife, and I, when I think about what we've walked through and what we've experienced, we've learned so much about God. We've learned so much about people. We've learned so much about trauma, about grieving, about healing, about inner healing, about the healing of the soul. And I just feel a mandate to share a lot of those things. In fact, I've had several prophetic words, one in particular that was so clear and so specific. I was at a conference in Redding, California, and I had a prophetic word given to me, and it was so specific to, don't be embarrassed about your story. Don't be ashamed of your story. Your story is what's going to give power to where God's taking you in the future, as well as the ability you're going to have to help other people through, tell your story. And I heard in that, like in just a few weeks, I heard like 3 different prophetic words independent of one another, confirming that. So I feel a bit of a mandate on me to share some of our story. Maybe in some of the videos we do, Gina may be able to jump in and help give some of her perspective. Her perspective is powerful, and you definitely want to hear that. But I just feel a mandate to help people who are walking this journey, to do it safely, because it can be very costly. It can be very traumatic. It can actually destroy relationships. It can destroy your marriage. It can destroy churches. It can destroy your own soul. It really can be a very, very difficult process. So if I can help somebody navigate that safely, that's very important to me. Another reason why it's important, I think, to share some of our story is that my role in my previous life was prominent enough that there's quite a record in videos and articles and books that I wrote. If you just Google my name, all sorts of stuff will come up from my past life. It's not like I can just, start volume 2 of my life, Steve Pixler 2.0, and all of that just disappear. There's too much of a public record there of my previous life, the things I preached, the things I taught that I don't believe anymore. And so I feel like I need to create a very clear distinction and even a good clear answer, and even in some cases a very clear apology for some of the things that I believed and taught, and some of the things I championed that I did so very sincerely, and yet I was very, very wrong. And I'd like to correct some of those things. But more than anything else, as we're launching a new church and we're moving on with life, I really want to establish a clear distinction between the old and the new. And I want to establish a very clear distinction between kind of the first volume of my life and the second volume of my life. In fact, as I share some of my story, you're going to hear that there's a very clear moment. It was the week that I turned 40, and I had a prophecy about turning 40. I'll share some of that in some of my story. But in that moment, there was a very clear demarcation when God said, okay, now it's time to move from the old story into a new story. And it was that transition which actually began several years before that, but it was when I turned 40 in, what year would that have been? 2010, do the math. But in 2010 when I actually began that journey in earnest, and then it was several more years until we fully transitioned out of our religious tradition. So I want to share these things because I feel I have a mandate, and then I also just want to be very clear about where I'm at today. Now, I do want to say as we move forward, what I will not do in these videos is attack the Oneness Pentecostal tradition that I came from. I have nothing but the highest honor and the highest esteem for the sincere people like my father, my mother, who is still a part of the Oneness Pentecostal movement, and my father, who died just a couple of years ago, almost 3 years ago, and he passed away very committed, very sincere, believed it very deeply, and was very heartbroken over my defection from the truth as he understood it. And yet we had to work through that. We did. Our relationship ended up being even stronger after. And when he passed, our relationship was very, very close. And I'll share some of those stories as we go along. But it was, for me, my experience coming out of it, though I had to process a lot of disappointment, a lot of bitterness, even at points some hatred that I had to work through, yet I come through all of this on the other side of it now with a deep sense of honor and respect for those that went before me, those who gave me this heritage. I was many generations deep in this, as I'll share. So what you're not going to hear me do is go on the attack. I'm not even going to spend time really going after the doctrines, like explaining what's wrong with this doctrine or that doctrine. I'm not really interested so much in discussing and debating all of the doctrinal nuances of Oneness Pentecostalism. I'm really more interested in dealing with the process, in helping people find their way through this process safely. That's really more important to me, helping people get their heart whole and healed, finding shalom and peace, and preserving strong relationships as the pressure and the tension and the stress begins to pull on those relationships. I'm more interested in helping people walk through it. If you want to know about, and I'll give a little bit of a summary of what Oneness Pentecostalism is, but if you really want to get into what's the difference, what's right, what's wrong, the weak points of theology, the strong points of theology, if you're interested in dealing with that, there's a vast, vast body of literature available for and against Oneness Pentecostalism. I also want to say that the things that we've learned are universal principles. They apply regardless of what tradition it is you're trying to work your way out of. The tradition we came from was very strict, very exclusive, very exclusionary. You were not saved unless you were a part of it. That may not be your experience. Maybe your experience is just coming from a more controlling environment, very traditional religious, or you may be even coming from a traditional religious environment that is not necessarily toxic or controlling, but is just dead. And you're just looking for life. You're looking for an encounter with God and a relationship with God. I actually want to help you navigate through all of that. So our story, though it's very unique and actually very fascinating, and in fact some parts of it are just kind of crazy, although our story is very unique, yet there are universal applications that are going to help you. So my prayer is that the story that we share can resonate with your experience and help you find your way through what can be very difficult transition. So I'm going to tell a little bit more about our story, about who we are and where we came from. In another video, I'll give you a little bit more introduction to us and some of our experience, and then we'll move on from there. Let's enjoy the journey together. And any comments you have, subscribe to the channel. Any comments you have, you want to reach out, discuss anything further, please let us know. We'd love to be able to help you any way we can as you navigate your way through.